My fiancé used his stepbrother's mental health struggles as a cover to have an affair with the stepbrother's ex-girlfriend for months, and when I left him he told everyone I gave up on the relationship because I couldn't handle his family issues. For context, my fiancé Ryan, 29M, and I, 27F, met through mutual friends right after I graduated college. He was working at a tech startup and I had just started my first real job at a marketing firm. We hit it off immediately. He was funny, caring, and we had this easy way of being together that I'd never experienced before. Within 6 months, we moved in together. My parents thought it was too fast, but it felt right at the time. Ryan's family situation is a bit complicated. His parents split up when he was 16. His dad remarried about 3 years after the divorce to a woman named Estella who had a son from her first marriage. That son is Andy, who's 28M now. Andy was 17 when his mom married Ryan's dad, so they only lived together for about a year before Andy went off to join the military. After his service, Andy moved back to our city about 2 years ago and started working construction. I met Andy properly about 6 months after he moved back. Before that, I'd only seen him at family dinners maybe twice. He seemed like a regular guy. Quiet, kept to himself mostly. Ryan always talked about how they weren't super close because of the age gap and the fact that they barely lived together growing up, but he said Andy was a good person who'd had a rough time after leaving the military. Ryan never went into details about what happened to Andy during his service, just said that he came back different and struggled to adjust. About a year ago, things started shifting. Ryan began spending more time with Andy. At first, I thought it was nice. Andy didn't seem to have many friends in the area and Ryan was making an effort to be there for him. They'd grab beers after work, watch games together, that sort of thing. I encouraged it because I could tell Ryan felt guilty that they'd never had a real brother relationship growing up. Then the frequency increased. Ryan started going over to Andy's apartment 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes he'd leave right after dinner, saying Andy needed help with something. Fixing a leaky faucet. Moving furniture. Setting up his new TV. There was always something. I didn't think much of it because Ryan has always been the kind of person who helps people. It's one of the things I love about him. But then other things started happening. Our sex life changed. We went from being intimate 3 or 4 times a week to maybe once a week, if that. When I tried to initiate anything, Ryan would say he was tired or had an early morning. He started coming to bed later, sometimes after I'd already fallen asleep. In the mornings, he'd be on his phone before he even said good morning to me. I caught him texting Andy at weird hours. 2 in the morning. During dinner. When we were watching movies together, his phone would buzz and he'd immediately pick it up, type something quickly, and put it back down. I asked him about it once and he said Andy was going through a hard time and needed someone to talk to. I felt bad for questioning it after that. The real problem started around March. We'd been talking about setting a wedding date since we got engaged. Every time I brought it up, Ryan found a reason to postpone the conversation. Too much going on at work. His dad was dealing with some health stuff. He wanted to save more money first. It was always something. I started to notice that right after I'd bring up wedding planning, he'd get a text from Andy and suddenly need to go help him with something urgent. My best friend Felicity started making comments. She'd say things like Ryan sure spends a lot of time with his stepbrother or ask if I was okay with how often he was leaving me alone at night. I'd defend him every time. I told her she didn't understand their family dynamic and that Ryan was just being a good brother. But her words stayed in my head. In May, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It was a Saturday and Ryan had told me that morning he was going to help Andy move some stuff into a storage unit. He left around 10 and said he'd be back by 2 at the latest. 2 o'clock came and went. Then 4. Then 6. I called him twice and both times it went straight to voicemail. I texted him multiple times with no response. He finally walked through the door at 8:30 that night. I was sitting on the couch and had been fighting the urge to call hospitals for the past hour. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled and he had this look on his face that I'd never seen before. I asked him what happened and why he hadn't called. He said his phone died and they'd ended up having to make multiple trips to the storage place because Andy had more stuff than they thought. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His voice was off. He wouldn't make eye contact. He went straight to the bathroom and took a long shower. When he came out, he barely ate the dinner I'd kept warm for him and said he needed to go to bed early. He was asleep within minutes. The next morning, I found his phone charging in the living room. I'd never looked through his phone before. I'm not that person. But I picked it up and the battery showed 73%. I checked the battery usage history and it showed his phone had been at 50% or higher all day yesterday. He'd lied about his phone dying. I didn't confront him right away. I spent the next few weeks watching. I noticed he started doing laundry more frequently and always on days when I wasn't home. He became protective of his phone in a way he'd never been before, taking it with him even when he went to the bathroom. He'd started wearing cologne more often, even on days when he was supposedly just going to hang out with Andy. The Andy visits increased to 4 or 5 times a week. Some nights Ryan wouldn't come home until past midnight. When I asked where he'd been, he'd say they'd lost track of time playing video games or watching a movie. But Ryan would look drained when he got home, not relaxed like someone who'd just been hanging out with a friend. Our engagement party was scheduled for late June. My parents were hosting it at their house and we'd invited about 50 people. The week before the party, Ryan sat me down and said he thought we should postpone it. He said work was crazy and he didn't think he could handle the stress of a big event right now. I asked if this was about Andy and he got defensive immediately. He said I was being unfair and that he was allowed to help his brother without me making it into some big thing. We had our first real fight that night. He ended up sleeping on the couch. We went ahead with the engagement party. Ryan seemed off the whole time. He was distracted, checking his phone constantly. At one point, I saw him step outside to take a call. When he came back in, he looked stressed. I asked him who it was and he said it was Andy asking about something work-related. It was a Saturday evening. What work question couldn't wait until Monday? After the party, things got worse. Ryan started picking fights with me over small things. I didn't put the dishes away correctly. I was watching TV too loud. I wasn't being understanding enough about his family obligations. It felt like he was trying to create distance between us and I didn't understand why. Last month, my mom called and asked if everything was okay with Ryan. She said he'd seemed distant at the engagement party and wanted to make sure we were doing all right. I broke down and told her everything. The late nights. The constant texting. The lies about his phone. The way he'd been pulling away from me. She listened quietly and then asked me a question that I'd been avoiding asking myself. She asked if I thought Ryan was having an affair. I told her no immediately. Ryan wouldn't do that. He was helping Andy. But after I hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started piecing things together differently. What if Andy wasn't really the one who needed help? What if Ryan was using Andy as an excuse to see someone else? What if all those nights he said he was at Andy's apartment, he was actually somewhere else entirely? I decided I needed to know for sure. Last Tuesday, Ryan told me he was going to Andy's place after work to help him assemble some furniture he'd bought. He said he'd probably be there until 9 or 10. I told him that was fine and to text me when he was heading home. I left work early that day. I drove to Andy's apartment complex and parked where I could see the entrance to his building. Ryan's car was already there. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching. At 7:30, I saw Ryan come out of the building. But he wasn't alone. Andy was with him. They walked to Ryan's car together, got in, and drove away. I followed them. They drove across town to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. Ryan pulled up in front of a small house with a neat front yard. They both got out and walked up to the front door. Andy used a key to open it and they went inside together. I sat in my car down the street, trying to figure out what I was looking at. Andy had told Ryan and the family that he lived in that apartment complex. So whose house was this? I waited for 30 minutes. Then an hour. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of my car and walked up to the house. I could see lights on inside but the curtains were drawn. I stood on the front porch for a full minute before I knocked. Andy answered the door. The look on his face when he saw me was pure panic. He tried to shut the door but I pushed past him into the house. I called out for Ryan. He appeared from down a hallway, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. He looked terrified. I asked him what was going on. Why was he here? Why had he lied about where Andy lived? Ryan opened his mouth but nothing came out. Andy put his hand on Ryan's shoulder and told me I should leave. I looked between the two of them and asked again what was happening. Ryan finally spoke. He asked me to sit down. He said there was something he needed to tell me but he didn't know how. Andy left the room and I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Ryan and I stood in the living room of this strange house and he told me that Andy doesn't live in that apartment. Someone else does. A woman named Felicity. Andy's ex-girlfriend who he'd been seeing on and off for the past year. I asked what that had to do with Ryan. Ryan sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. He said he'd been lying to me for months. He wasn't coming here to help Andy. He was coming here for himself. And then he told me something that made the whole room spin. Update 1: I didn't think I'd be back here so soon but I need to write this down because everything has exploded in ways I never could have predicted. After Ryan's confession in that house, I walked out. I didn't say anything, I just left. I got in my car and drove around for hours because I couldn't bring myself to go back to our apartment. Eventually I ended up at Felicity's place and told her everything. She let me stay in her guest room that night. Ryan called 14 times. I didn't answer once. For anyone who's confused by my last post, let me explain what Ryan actually told me that night. The woman who lives in that house, Felicity, isn't just Andy's ex-girlfriend. She runs a support group for veterans dealing with PTSD and adjustment issues. Andy started attending about a year ago after he moved back to the city. That's where he met her and they dated for a few months before things ended badly between them. Ryan told me that last September, Andy called him in the middle of the night having what Ryan described as a complete breakdown. Andy was talking about not wanting to be here anymore and Ryan panicked. He drove over to Andy's actual apartment and found him in a bad state. Andy admitted he'd been struggling with intrusive thoughts since leaving the military and that ending things with Felicity had made everything worse because she was one of the few people who understood what he was going through. Ryan spent that whole night talking Andy down. The next day, he convinced Andy to start going back to Felicity's group sessions, even though Andy was embarrassed about seeing her again. Ryan offered to drive him to the meetings and wait outside so Andy wouldn't have to take the bus and risk backing out. That's when the lies to me started. But it wasn't just about driving Andy to group sessions. Ryan told me that after a few weeks, Felicity approached him in the parking lot after one of Andy's meetings. She asked if Ryan wanted to come inside and observe one of the sessions to better understand what Andy was dealing with. Ryan went to one session. Then another. Then he started going every week even when Andy couldn't make it. Ryan said he started going to these meetings because he wanted to understand Andy better, but then he admitted something else. His own dad had served in the military before Ryan was born. Ryan's dad never talked about it much, but Ryan grew up watching his dad deal with nightmares and mood swings that nobody in the family understood. His parents' divorce when Ryan was 16 happened partly because his mom couldn't handle his dad's issues anymore. Ryan said sitting in those group sessions helped him understand his father in a way he never had before. I listened to all of this standing in that living room and I asked him why he couldn't just tell me the truth. Why did he have to lie for months? Why did he have to sneak around and make me think he was having an affair? He said he didn't think I would understand. He said it felt like something private that wasn't his story to tell, and he was worried I'd think it was weird that he was going to a support group when he'd never been in the military himself. I left after that. Like I said, I went to Felicity's. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to process everything. Ryan sent me long text messages apologizing and asking if we could talk. I finally responded that afternoon and told him I needed space. I stayed at Felicity's for 5 days. During those 5 days, I did a lot of thinking. I tried to understand why Ryan would lie like this instead of just telling me what was really going on. I kept coming back to the same thing. If this was really just about supporting Andy and understanding his dad better, why all the secrecy? Why the late nights? Why the protective behavior with his phone? On day 4, Felicity asked me a question I'd been avoiding. She asked if I believed Ryan's story. I realized I didn't know. Something about the whole thing still felt off to me, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. On day 6, I went back to our apartment. Ryan was there and he looked like he hadn't slept since I left. We sat down and talked for hours. He apologized over and over. He said he knew he'd messed up and that he should have been honest from the start. He promised no more lies. He asked if we could work through this and move forward with our wedding planning. I told him I didn't know yet. Over the next week, things were tense but we were trying. Ryan made an effort to be more present. He came straight home from work. He showed me his phone without me asking. He suggested we set a wedding date for next spring. I wanted to believe we were moving past it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something he wasn't telling me. Then last weekend, something happened that changed everything again. Ryan's dad called and asked if we wanted to come over for dinner on Saturday. Estella was making her famous lasagna and they wanted to celebrate finally setting a wedding date. We agreed to go. At dinner, Estella asked Ryan how Andy was doing. She said she'd been worried about him since they hadn't heard from him in a couple weeks. Ryan said Andy was doing better and had been attending his meetings regularly. Estella looked confused. She asked what meetings. Ryan's face went pale. He mumbled something about a veterans group and tried to change the subject. But Estella pressed. She said Andy had told her months ago that he'd stopped going to those meetings because they weren't helping. She said the last time she'd talked to Andy, he'd mentioned he was thinking about moving to another state for a fresh start and had been interviewing for jobs out there. Ryan didn't say anything. He just stared at his plate. After dinner, I pulled Ryan aside and asked him what Estella was talking about. If Andy had stopped going to meetings, why was Ryan still making excuses to leave the house several times a week? Ryan got defensive. He said Estella must have been confused about what Andy told her. But I could see it in his eyes. He was lying again. We left his dad's house early. The car ride home was silent. When we got back to the apartment, I told Ryan I wanted the truth. All of it. No more partial explanations or convenient stories. I told him if he lied to me one more time, I was done. He sat on the couch for a long time without saying anything. Then he told me he needed to show me something. He pulled out his phone and opened his messages. He scrolled to a conversation with a contact labeled with just the letter J. He handed me the phone. I started reading. The messages went back months. They were frequent, sometimes multiple times a day. The tone was familiar, almost intimate. Jay would send messages asking when Ryan could come over. Ryan would respond with times. Jay would send messages late at night saying things like thinking about you or wish you were here. Ryan's responses were shorter but he never shut it down. He'd say things like tomorrow or I'll try to get away. I scrolled up further and found messages from right after we got engaged. Jay had sent a long message saying something about how this complicated things but that they'd figure it out. Ryan had responded that he needed time to think. Jay had replied asking if he was really going to marry me or if he was just scared to make a different choice. I looked up at Ryan. I asked him who Jay was. He took a long breath and told me. Felicity. Andy's ex-girlfriend. The woman who ran the support group. Ryan had been seeing her. Not just attending meetings. Seeing her. For the past 7 months. He tried to explain. He said it wasn't supposed to happen. He said they'd just been talking at first, after the group sessions. She understood things about his family that I couldn't understand. They'd started getting coffee after meetings. Then dinner. Then he'd started going to her house even when there were no group sessions scheduled. He swore they hadn't slept together but admitted they'd kissed. Multiple times. I handed him back his phone. I walked into our bedroom and started packing a bag. Ryan followed me, talking the entire time. He said he'd ended it with her 2 weeks ago. He said that's why he'd been trying so hard to fix things with me. He said he chose me and wanted to make our relationship work. He said Felicity meant nothing compared to what we had. I finished packing and walked past him to the door. He asked where I was going. I told him I didn't know but I couldn't be there anymore. He tried to grab my arm but I pulled away. I left and I haven't been back since. I'm staying with my parents now. They know everything. My dad wanted to go over to the apartment and confront Ryan himself but I asked him not to. I don't know what happens next. Ryan has been sending me messages every day. Some are apologies. Some are explanations. Some are him saying he loves me and begging for another chance. I haven't responded to any of them. The worst part is that I keep thinking about all the times I defended him to Felicity. All the times I told myself I was being paranoid or unfair. I feel like an idiot for not seeing what was actually happening. Everyone around me could see it but I refused to believe Ryan would do this to me. Update 2: I wasn't going to post again but some things have happened that I need to get out. The last 6 weeks have been the worst of my life and I'm still trying to figure out how I ended up here. After my last update, I stayed at my parents' house for 2 weeks. Ryan kept messaging me but I didn't respond. My mom thought I should at least talk to him to get closure, but I wasn't ready. Then Ryan's dad called me. He said he'd heard from Ryan that we were having problems and he wanted to check on me. I almost hung up but something made me stay on the line. Ryan's dad said his son was a mess and had been staying with him and Estella for the past week because he couldn't stand being in our apartment alone. He said Ryan had told him everything, including about Felicity. He apologized for his son's behavior and said he and Estella were shocked that Ryan would do something like this. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said Ryan had always been afraid of ending up like him, meaning his dad, but that he'd gone ahead and hurt the people he loved anyway, just in a different way. We talked for almost an hour. He told me stories about Ryan as a kid and how Ryan used to get anxious about his parents fighting. He said after the divorce, Ryan had made him promise that if he ever got married, he wouldn't mess it up the way his dad had. I asked what he meant by that and he said Ryan blamed him for the divorce, thought his dad's problems had driven his mom away. Ryan's dad said he'd spent years trying to make his son understand that relationships are complicated and that his mom had her own reasons for leaving, but Ryan had held on to this idea that if his dad had just been different, the family would have stayed together. I didn't know what to do with this information. It didn't excuse what Ryan had done, but it made me understand him a little better. I thanked Ryan's dad for calling and told him I needed more time to think. A few days later, Felicity convinced me to at least get my stuff from the apartment. She offered to come with me. We picked a time when Ryan would be at work. Felicity drove me over and we spent 2 hours packing up my things. It was harder than I expected. Every item I picked up reminded me of something. A book Ryan had bought me for my birthday. A mug we'd gotten on a trip to the coast. Photos of us from better times. We were almost done when I heard a key in the door. Ryan walked in. He stopped when he saw us. Felicity immediately stepped between us and asked what he was doing home. He said he'd taken the afternoon off because he had a feeling I might come by. He looked at the boxes and asked if this was really it, if I was really leaving for good. I told him I didn't know what else he expected. He said he expected me to at least let him talk, to let him explain everything properly. Felicity told him he'd had months to be honest and that it was too late now. Ryan ignored her and looked directly at me. He asked if we could talk alone for just 10 minutes. Felicity said absolutely not, but I told her it was okay. She left the apartment but said she'd be right outside if I needed her. Ryan and I sat on opposite ends of the couch. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and he'd clearly lost weight. He asked if I'd gotten the letters he'd sent to my parents' house. I told him I'd thrown them away without reading them. He nodded like he'd expected that. Then he told me he'd stopped seeing Felicity completely. He said she'd tried to contact him several times but he'd blocked her number. He said he'd also stopped going to Andy's actual apartment because seeing Andy meant being reminded of how this all started. I asked him how Andy felt about everything. Ryan said Andy was angry with him. Andy had apparently told Ryan that using him as an excuse to sneak around with his ex-girlfriend was a betrayal not just to me but to him. Andy had asked Ryan why he couldn't have just been honest from the beginning about wanting to attend the support group, and Ryan didn't have a good answer. Andy had stopped speaking to him 3 weeks ago. Ryan said his relationship with his dad was strained too. His dad was disappointed in him and Estella was upset that Ryan had dragged Andy into his mess. Ryan said he'd managed to destroy multiple relationships because he'd been too much of a coward to be honest about what he was feeling. He said he'd been attending actual counseling sessions now, not support groups, but one-on-one sessions to figure out why he'd sabotaged our relationship. He asked if there was any chance I'd consider couples counseling. He said he wasn't asking me to take him back right away, just to give him a chance to prove he could change. I told him I didn't think counseling could fix what he'd broken. Trust isn't something you can repair with a few sessions and good intentions. He started crying. I'd only seen Ryan cry one other time in 4 years, at his grandfather's funeral. Seeing him break down did something to me, but not what he probably hoped. It made me realize how much I'd changed in the past few months. I didn't feel the instinct to comfort him anymore. I just felt tired. I told him I needed to finish packing. He asked if he could help. I said no. He sat on the couch and watched me and Felicity carry boxes out to her car. When we had everything, I took off my engagement ring and placed it on the kitchen counter. Ryan saw me do it and made a sound like he'd been punched. I walked out without looking back. The next few weeks were a blur. I focused on work and spent my free time looking for a new apartment. I didn't want to stay with my parents forever. I found a small one-bedroom place about 20 minutes from my office and signed the lease. Moving into an empty apartment by myself felt strange after living with Ryan for so long, but it also felt necessary. I needed space that was just mine. Ryan sent me one final message about a month after I'd picked up my things. He said he understood that I wasn't going to respond, but he wanted me to know that he'd signed the lease termination for our old apartment and had moved his stuff out. He said all the bills were settled and I didn't need to worry about anything on that end. He said he hoped someday I'd be able to forgive him, not for his sake but for mine, because holding on to anger would only hurt me. He said he'd always loved me and that meeting me was the best thing that ever happened to him, even if he'd ruined it. Then he said he wouldn't contact me again unless I reached out first. I read that message about 10 times. Then I deleted it and blocked his number. Last week, I ran into Andy at a grocery store. It was awkward. We made eye contact across the produce section and for a second I thought he might turn around and leave, but he walked over to me instead. He asked how I was doing. I said I was managing. He said he was sorry about everything and that he felt responsible even though I'd told him he wasn't. He said Ryan had made his own choices and those choices weren't Andy's fault. I asked him how the job search was going. He looked surprised that I knew about that. He said he'd gotten an offer for a position in Colorado and was planning to move in 2 months. He said he needed a fresh start somewhere that didn't remind him of everything that had happened in the past year. I understood that completely. I told him I hoped things worked out for him. He thanked me and said he hoped the same for me. Then we went back to our shopping. That interaction stayed with me for days. Andy was getting a fresh start in a new place. Ryan was apparently putting in the work to understand himself better. Everyone was moving forward in some way. Except me. I was stuck in this strange limbo where I wasn't who I used to be but I didn't know who I was becoming. My mom keeps asking if I'm dating again. She thinks getting back out there would help me move on. But I can't imagine trusting someone enough to let them in right now. Every time I think about meeting someone new, I remember all the signs I missed with Ryan. The late nights. The phone calls. The way he'd started pulling away months before I caught him. How did I not see it? How did I let it go on for so long? Felicity says I need to stop blaming myself. She says Ryan is the one who lied and cheated, not me. She says I trusted someone I loved and that's not a character flaw. But it feels like one. It feels like I should have known better. It feels like I should have protected myself instead of believing his excuses about helping Andy and processing his family trauma. I haven't told many people the full story. Most of our mutual friends just know we broke up and have taken sides accordingly. Some have reached out to me with support. Others have stopped talking to me altogether, presumably staying loyal to Ryan. I don't blame them. We were together for 4 years and our lives were deeply intertwined. Separating all of that is complicated and messy. The wedding venue called last month asking about our deposit. I'd forgotten we'd even put one down. I explained that the wedding was cancelled and asked about getting the money back. They said the deposit was non-refundable according to the contract we'd signed. I told them to keep it. I didn't have the energy to fight about it and honestly, I didn't want the money. It felt tainted somehow. Update 3: This will be my last post about this situation. I need to close this chapter and move forward with my life, and I think writing this final update will help me do that. About 3 weeks ago, Felicity contacted me. I don't know how she got my number since I'd changed it after blocking Ryan. She sent me a text message saying we needed to talk and that there were things about Ryan I deserved to know. My first instinct was to delete the message and block her immediately, but something stopped me. I called Felicity and asked what she thought I should do. She said it was up to me but that sometimes information is power, even when it hurts. I agreed to meet Felicity at a coffee shop across town. I got there early and sat at a corner table where I could see the entrance. She walked in exactly on time. She was pretty in a natural way, with long dark hair and tired eyes. She ordered a coffee and sat down across from me. For a minute, neither of us said anything. She started by apologizing. She said she knew meeting me was selfish but that she hadn't been able to stop thinking about what Ryan had told her about me. She said she'd convinced herself that my relationship with Ryan wasn't serious or that I probably wasn't a good match for him anyway. She said she'd justified the whole thing by telling herself she understood Ryan in ways I couldn't because of her work with veterans and their families. I asked her why she wanted to meet now. She said because she'd recently found out something that changed how she saw everything. About a month ago, One of the men from her support group had mentioned that Ryan had started attending sessions again. Felicity said she'd told the guy there must be some mistake because Ryan wasn't a veteran and had stopped coming to observer sessions months ago. The guy had insisted it was Ryan and that he'd been coming every week for the past month, participating fully in group discussions as if he had his own service-related trauma to process. Felicity had pulled Ryan aside after the next session and asked him what was going on. Ryan told her he'd realized during his solo counseling that he had his own trauma related to his father's military service and the way it had affected their family. He said the counselor had suggested he might benefit from hearing other people's stories about similar situations. Felicity said she'd told Ryan this wasn't appropriate, that the group was for veterans and direct family members currently supporting veterans, not for people processing childhood issues related to a parent's service from years ago. Ryan had apparently gotten upset and accused Felicity of gatekeeping trauma. He'd said his experiences were just as valid as anyone else's in the group. Felicity had asked him to leave and not come back. Ryan had refused and said she couldn't ban him from a support group. She'd had to ask one of the other group members to escort him out. Felicity said after that incident, she'd started questioning everything Ryan had told her during their months together. She'd started wondering if he'd manipulated her the same way he'd apparently manipulated me. She said she'd reviewed his old messages and realized how often he'd positioned himself as someone who deeply understood pain and loss, even though his actual experiences didn't seem to match the level of trauma he'd claimed to carry. I sat there listening to all of this and I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to thank Felicity for confirming what I'd suspected, that Ryan's whole story about attending the support group to understand Andy and his dad had been partially fabricated. But another part of me was angry at her for expecting me to sympathize with her realization that Ryan had lied to her too. She'd known he was engaged to me and she'd still gotten involved with him. She'd made her choices. I asked her what she wanted from me. She said she just wanted me to know the truth and to understand that Ryan might not have been the person either of us thought he was. She said she'd been doing some of her own research since the incident and had started wondering if Ryan showed signs of something more complicated than just being a liar or a cheater. She didn't say the specific words, but she implied she thought he might have a pattern of behavior that went beyond a simple affair. I told her I didn't need her amateur diagnosis of my ex-fiancé. I told her that whatever Ryan's problems were, they weren't my responsibility anymore and they weren't hers either. She nodded and said she understood. Then she said one more thing. She told me she'd heard from Andy that Ryan had been telling people, including Ryan's dad, that I'd left him because I couldn't handle his family issues and that I'd given up on the relationship when things got hard. She said she wanted me to know that wasn't the story she'd heard and that if I ever needed someone to verify what really happened, she'd be willing to do that. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car for a while after that meeting, trying to process it all. Ryan was still lying. He was still crafting narratives that made him look like the victim. Even after everything, he couldn't just be honest about what he'd done. I drove to Ryan's dad's house. I hadn't planned to, but after hearing what Felicity said about Ryan's version of events, I felt like I needed to set the record straight with at least one member of his family. Estella answered the door and seemed surprised to see me. I asked if Ryan's dad was home. She called him over and the three of us sat in their living room. I told them everything. Not just the surface level about Ryan's affair with Felicity, but all of it. The months of lies. The way he'd used Andy as an excuse. The text messages. The fact that he'd apparently been continuing to insert himself into spaces where he didn't belong and claiming trauma that wasn't his to claim. Estella looked horrified. Ryan's dad just looked sad. He asked me if I was sure about all of this. I showed him Felicity's contact information and said he could verify it with her if he wanted to. He shook his head and said he believed me. He said he'd suspected Ryan was lying about some things but had hoped he was wrong. He apologized to me for his son's behavior and said he understood why I'd ended the relationship. Estella asked if I thought Ryan needed professional help beyond regular counseling. I said I didn't know and that it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. She said she was going to talk to Ryan about everything I'd told them and encourage him to be more honest with his counselor about his patterns of behavior. I told her that was between them and that I just wanted to make sure they knew the truth since Ryan was apparently spreading lies about why we broke up. I left after that. I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying around. I'd told the truth and whatever happened next wasn't my responsibility. The next week, Ryan sent me an email. He said his dad had talked to him and that he knew I'd told them everything. He said he was sorry for trying to control the narrative and that he'd been too ashamed to admit the full truth to his family. He said he'd been dishonest about attending the support group again and that Felicity was right to ask him to leave. He said his counselor had helped him see that he'd been appropriating other people's trauma because he didn't think his own childhood issues were significant enough to justify how he felt. He said he was working on it but understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. He said he hoped I could move on and find happiness with someone who deserved me. I didn't respond. I archived the email and went back to my life. It's been about 2 months since then. I'm settled into my new apartment. I adopted a cat from the local shelter. I've been spending more time with friends and family. Work has been busy, which is good because it keeps my mind occupied. I've started running in the mornings before work and I've signed up for a half marathon in the spring. I'm not dating yet, but I'm not opposed to it eventually. I'm just focusing on myself right now. I don't think about Ryan every day anymore. When I do think about him, it's less about what he did and more about what I learned from the whole situation. I learned that trust is fragile and that once it's broken, it's almost impossible to put back together. I learned that you can love someone and still walk away from them. I learned that closure doesn't always come from the other person admitting their mistakes. Sometimes you have to create your own closure by deciding you're done carrying their weight. Andy moved to Colorado last month. He sent me a brief text saying goodbye and thanking me for not blaming him for what Ryan did. I wished him well. I genuinely hope he finds what he's looking for out there. As for Ryan, I don't know where he is or what he's doing. I've blocked him on everything and I've asked mutual friends not to give me updates about his life. Whether he's actually getting help or still lying to himself and everyone around him isn't my concern anymore. I'm doing okay. Some days are harder than others, but I'm moving forward. That's all I can do. This whole experience taught me that sometimes the life you planned isn't the life you end up with, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes things fall apart so better things can come together. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. That's all any of us can do, really. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2 found out my twin brother had been secretly raising another man's child and his psychotic wife had been using my name as the father on official records. When I tried to clear my name, she went completely insane. I never thought I would be writing something like this on the internet. I am Phil, 45M, and what happened 3 weeks ago has turned my entire world upside down. I need to get this out because I have nobody else to talk to about this mess. I have an identical twin brother named Davis, 45M. We look exactly the same. People have confused us for each other our entire lives. Growing up, we used to switch places in school sometimes just for fun. Our parents could barely tell us apart unless we were standing right next to each other. Davis is 10 minutes older than me, which he never let me forget as kids. We both went to the same college but studied different things. I went into accounting and Davis became a construction foreman. After college, we stayed close. We lived in the same city, hung out every weekend, and our families did everything together. Davis married his college girlfriend Patricia, 42F, when we were both 26. I married my wife Liz, 43F, 2 years later. Davis and Patricia tried to have kids for years but could not. They went to doctors and found out Davis had some medical issues that made it very unlikely he could father children naturally. They looked into different options, but Patricia wanted biological children badly. They talked about sperm donors and other treatments, but nothing worked out. This went on for about 5 years. Meanwhile, Liz and I had our daughter Amber, now 16F, when I was 29. We wanted more kids, but Liz had complications during pregnancy and the doctor said another pregnancy could be dangerous for her. We decided Amber was enough and we focused on being the best parents we could to her. Davis and Patricia seemed fine with not having kids for a while. They traveled a lot, bought a nice house, and had good careers. Patricia got promoted to regional manager at her marketing firm. Davis started his own construction company. From the outside, everything looked perfect. About 12 years ago, Davis started acting different. He would cancel plans at the last minute. He stopped coming to family dinners as often. When I asked him about it, he said work was getting busy and Patricia was dealing with some family issues. I believed him because his construction business was doing well and taking on bigger projects. Patricia also started acting strange around the same time. She would avoid eye contact with me and Liz. She stopped inviting us over for dinner parties like she used to. When we did see them, she seemed nervous and would make excuses to leave early. Liz noticed it too, but we figured they were going through a rough patch in their marriage. The weird behavior continued for months. Davis would disappear for entire weekends without explanation. He said he was working on job sites in other towns. Patricia started wearing different clothes and looked tired all the time. She gained some weight too. Liz thought maybe they were having fertility treatments again, but when she asked Patricia about it, Patricia quickly changed the subject. One day about 11 years ago, I ran into Davis's friend Tom at the grocery store. Tom looked confused when he saw me and said something about how he thought I was in Chicago with the new baby. I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him I had been home all week and asked what baby he meant. Tom got embarrassed and said he must have mixed me up with someone else. That conversation bothered me for weeks. I asked Davis about it, but he said Tom was probably drunk or confused. Davis started avoiding me more after that. We went from seeing each other multiple times a week to maybe once a month. When I tried to call him, he would not answer or would call back hours later with some excuse. Liz started getting suspicious too. She said something was definitely wrong with Davis and Patricia, but she could not figure out what. Amber missed her Uncle Davis because he used to take her to the park and teach her how to throw a baseball. She kept asking when Uncle Davis was coming over again. The distance between us continued for years. Davis missed Amber's birthday parties, Christmas dinners, and other family events. He always had work excuses. Patricia barely spoke to us anymore. When we did see them, they both seemed on edge and ready to leave as soon as possible. About 3 years ago, Davis moved his business to a town about 2 hours away. He said there were better opportunities there. Patricia quit her job and moved with him. They sold their house and left without much warning. Davis said they needed a fresh start and wanted to try living somewhere new. After they moved, we saw them maybe 3 times a year. They would come back to visit our parents during holidays, but the visits were short. Davis looked different too. He seemed older and more tired. He started wearing glasses and grew a beard. Patricia barely talked to anyone during these visits. Last month, our father had a heart attack and was in the hospital for a week. I called Davis immediately and he came back to town. He stayed at our parents' house and spent every day at the hospital with me. For the first time in years, we were spending real time together. Dad recovered and came home after a week. Davis stayed for a few more days to help out. On his last night in town, we were sitting on our parents' back porch drinking beer like we used to do when we were younger. I thought maybe we could finally talk about what had been wrong between us for so long. I brought up how distant he had been and asked if I had done something to upset him. Davis got quiet for a long time. Then he started crying, which I had not seen him do since we were kids. He said he had something to tell me but was scared about how I would react. Davis told me that 11 years ago, Patricia had gotten pregnant. But the baby was not his. She had been having an affair with a coworker for months. When she found out she was pregnant, the other man wanted nothing to do with it and threatened to tell Davis about the affair if Patricia did not leave him alone. Patricia was terrified about losing Davis and their marriage. She also did not want people to know she had cheated. So, she came up with a plan. She told Davis the baby was his and that the doctors had been wrong about his fertility issues. Davis was so happy about finally having a child that he believed her completely. But Patricia was worried that people in our town would ask questions about the pregnancy since everyone knew about their fertility problems. She was also scared that the real father might cause trouble. So, she convinced Davis they should move away before the baby was born and start fresh somewhere new. They moved to the town 2 hours away right before Patricia gave birth. She had a son they named Jake, now 11M. Davis was thrilled to be a father and never questioned anything. He registered the birth certificate and put his name as the father. But there was another part to this story that made everything worse. About 6 months after Jake was born, Patricia got pregnant again. This time it was definitely Davis's biological child because they had been trying IVF treatments that had finally worked. She gave birth to a daughter they named Qley, now 10F. Davis said that for the past 10 years, he had been raising 2 children but only one was actually his. Jake looked nothing like Davis but did look like Patricia, so nobody questioned it. Qley looked exactly like Davis and Patricia both. Here is where the story gets crazy. Patricia was still paranoid about people from our hometown finding out about Jake's real father and asking questions about the timeline of events. She was also worried about running into the real father or his friends. So, she came up with another plan. Whenever they had to come back to our hometown for visits or events, Patricia would tell people that Jake was my son, not Davis's. She said I was helping them take care of him temporarily because of some made-up family emergency. Since Davis and I look identical, nobody questioned it when they saw Davis with Jake. Patricia had been using my name and identity as Jake's father for years during these visits. She told Jake to call Davis by his first name instead of Dad when they were in our hometown. She coached Jake on what to say if anyone asked about his parents. Jake thought it was some kind of game. The few times people in our town saw Davis with Jake, they assumed it was me with my son. Patricia would introduce Jake as Phil's boy if anyone asked. She had even used my name on some school forms and medical records when they visited doctors in our hometown. I sat there listening to this story and could not believe what I was hearing. Davis said he found out about Patricia using my identity only recently when Jake started asking questions about why he had to pretend I was his father sometimes. Davis confronted Patricia and she broke down and admitted everything. Davis said he was planning to divorce Patricia and file for custody of both children. He wanted to tell the truth about Jake's parentage but was worried about how it would affect the boy. Jake had been calling him Dad for 11 years and thought Davis was his biological father. I asked Davis why he was telling me all this now. He said Patricia had been blackmailing him to stay quiet by threatening to tell everyone in our hometown that I was Jake's real father and had abandoned him. She said she would ruin my reputation and marriage if Davis tried to leave her or expose the truth. Davis said he could not live with the lies anymore and wanted to make things right with me. He apologized for all the years of distance between us and said he had been trying to protect me from Patricia's schemes. He also said he was scared about losing Jake, who he loved as his own son regardless of biology. I drove home that night and told Liz everything. She was shocked but said it explained a lot about Davis and Patricia's strange behavior over the years. Liz was angry that Patricia had been using my name and identity without permission. She was also worried about what this might mean for our family if Patricia tried to cause more trouble. The next morning, Davis packed up and went back to his town. He said he was going to confront Patricia again and demand she stop using my identity. He also wanted to start the process of getting divorced and figuring out custody arrangements. 2 days later, I got a call from a social worker in Davis's town. She said there had been a report about child welfare concerns involving children who might be mine. She had my name and information on file as the father of a boy named Jake. She wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the situation. I explained to the social worker that there had been a mistake and I was not Jake's father. I told her she needed to speak with my brother Davis instead. The social worker seemed confused and said the information she had listed me as the father on several documents. I called Davis immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried calling Patricia, but her phone was disconnected. I drove to their town that same day to find out what was happening. When I got to their house, there was a police car in the driveway. A neighbor told me that Davis had been arrested the day before on charges related to child endangerment and fraud. Patricia and the kids were staying with Patricia's sister in another state until everything got sorted out. The police officer who was still at the house told me there had been reports about fake identity documents and questions about the children's legal guardianship. He said Davis was being held pending investigation into possible identity theft and fraud charges. I went to the police station and tried to explain the situation. The officers said they had evidence that someone had been using fraudulent documents with my name and information for years. They showed me copies of school enrollment forms, medical records, and other papers that had my name listed as Jake's father. The police said Davis claimed he was innocent and that his wife had been forging documents without his knowledge. But they also had witnesses who said they had seen Davis presenting himself as me in various situations over the years. The officers said it was a complicated case and would take time to sort out. I hired a lawyer that week to help clear up the mess. My lawyer said I might be able to press charges against Patricia for identity theft and fraud. He also said Davis could face serious legal consequences if it was proven he knowingly participated in using my identity. Now I am stuck in the middle of this disaster. Davis is facing criminal charges. Patricia has disappeared with both kids. The social services department thinks I might be Jake's father and wants to investigate my fitness as a parent. My own family is under scrutiny because of someone else's lies. Amber has been asking why Uncle Davis is in jail and why people keep calling our house asking about another kid. Liz is stressed about the whole situation and worried it might affect her job if word gets out. Our parents are devastated and do not understand how their sons got involved in such a mess. I have not heard from Davis in 2 weeks. His lawyer told my lawyer that Davis wants to testify that I had nothing to do with any of this and that Patricia was the one behind all the fraud. But that might not be enough to clear my name completely. The worst part is that Jake and Qley are caught in the middle of all this chaos. Jake is probably confused about who his real father is and why his family has been torn apart. Qley is dealing with her parents getting divorced and her father being arrested. Neither of those kids asked for any of this mess. I do not know what is going to happen next. My lawyer says it could take months to sort out all the legal issues. In the meantime, I have to live with people thinking I might be some kind of deadbeat father who abandoned his kid. Every time someone looks at me funny in town, I wonder if they think I'm Jake's father. This whole situation has destroyed my relationship with my twin brother, possibly forever. Even if Davis gets out of this legal trouble, I do not know how we can ever go back to being close like we used to be. Too much has happened and too many lies have been told. I guess I am writing this because I need to tell someone what really happened before more rumors start spreading around town. I also want people to know that sometimes family can hurt you in ways you never imagined possible. Update 1: A lot has happened since my original post and I wanted to update everyone who has been following this mess. Some of you sent helpful messages and I appreciate the support. First, the legal situation with Davis has gotten more complicated. His lawyer was able to get the charges reduced from felony fraud to misdemeanor identity theft since Davis cooperated with investigators and provided evidence that Patricia was the main person behind the fake documents. Davis pled guilty to knowingly allowing someone to use my identity and got 2 years probation plus community service. Davis was released from jail after 3 weeks, but he has to stay in his town until his probation is finished. He called me right after he got out and apologized again for everything. He said he wanted to make things right between us but understood if I needed time to process everything. The social services investigation into my family was dropped after Davis's testimony and the evidence showed I had no knowledge of any of the fraud. The social worker apologized for the confusion and closed our case. My lawyer said there should not be any more issues with that aspect of the situation. But here is where things get interesting. Remember how Patricia disappeared with both kids right after Davis was arrested? Well, it turns out she did not just run away to hide. She went to her sister's house in Nevada and immediately filed for divorce from Davis. She also filed for full custody of both children and claimed Davis was an unfit father because of his arrest. Patricia's divorce paperwork included some shocking allegations. She claimed Davis had been abusing her and the children for years. She said he had threatened her to keep quiet about his illegal activities. She also claimed Davis had forced her to use my identity as part of some elaborate scheme to avoid paying child support or taxes. Every single thing Patricia claimed in those divorce papers was a lie, but she had managed to get a temporary restraining order against Davis that prevented him from seeing Jake or Qley. Davis's lawyer said Patricia was trying to use his arrest as leverage to get full custody and probably alimony. Davis was devastated about not being able to see his kids. He had been Jake's father for 11 years and loved him just as much as Qley, even knowing Jake was not biologically his. Davis said Jake had been calling him crying and asking when he could come home. It broke my heart to hear about that little boy being confused and scared. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own problems from this situation. Word had gotten around our hometown about the arrest and the identity theft charges. People who had seen Davis with Jake over the years were now gossiping about whether I was really Jake's father and had been lying about it all along. Amber came home from school one day and said some kids were asking her if she had a secret brother that I did not want to claim. Liz had to go to the school and explain the situation to the principal to stop the rumors from spreading among the students. My boss at the accounting firm also called me into his office to ask about the situation. Someone had told him there might be issues with my background that could affect my ability to handle client finances. I had to show him all the legal documents proving I was not involved in any fraud to keep my job. The stress was affecting my whole family. Liz started having trouble sleeping and Amber was embarrassed to go to school because of all the questions and stares. Our parents were getting calls from relatives and old friends asking about what was really going on with their sons. Then something happened that changed everything. Jake's real biological father showed up. His name is Robert, 46M, and he still lives in our hometown. Apparently, Robert had heard the gossip about the identity theft case and Jake's paternity through mutual friends. He realized the timeline matched up with when he had the affair with Patricia 11 years ago. Robert came to my house one evening and introduced himself. He said he had been thinking about that affair for years and wondered if Patricia had gotten pregnant from it. When he heard about Jake and saw photos of the boy, he was pretty sure Jake was his son. Robert told me he had tried to contact Patricia multiple times over the years but she had blocked his number and avoided him completely. He said he would have been willing to pay child support and be involved in Jake's life if Patricia had told him about the pregnancy. Robert is married with 2 other children but said his wife knew about the affair and they had worked through it years ago. His wife was actually supportive of him trying to connect with Jake if the boy was really his son. I called Davis and told him about Robert's visit. Davis was not surprised because he said he had always suspected who Jake's real father might be based on some things Patricia had said over the years. Davis said he would be willing to do DNA testing to prove Jake was not his biological son if it would help with the custody situation. Robert hired his own lawyer and filed paperwork to establish paternity of Jake. This completely changed the legal situation because now there were 3 potential fathers involved in the custody case: Davis, who had raised Jake for 11 years, Robert, who was probably the biological father, and me, who had been named as the father on fraudulent documents. Patricia's lawyer tried to fight the DNA testing but the court ordered it anyway. The results came back 2 weeks later and confirmed that Robert was Jake's biological father, not Davis or me. Davis was relieved to have scientific proof that cleared up the paternity question once and for all. But this created a new problem. Jake had been living with Patricia in Nevada for 2 months and calling her sister asking when he could go home to see his dad, Davis. Jake did not know anything about Robert and had never been told that Davis was not his biological father. The court ordered a meeting between all the parties to figure out what was best for Jake. Patricia showed up with her lawyer and immediately started claiming that Robert was a dangerous person who should not be around her son. She said Robert had stalked her years ago and threatened her, which Robert's lawyer said was completely false. Patricia also tried to claim that I was still somehow involved in the identity theft and should not be allowed near Jake either. My lawyer shut that down quickly with all the evidence proving my innocence, but it showed that Patricia was still trying to cause problems for everyone. The most heartbreaking part of that meeting was when they brought Jake in to talk to the judge about what he wanted. Jake was confused and scared because he did not understand why everyone was fighting over him. He kept asking when he could go home with his dad Davis and why his mom was saying bad things about everyone. The judge decided that Jake needed time to process everything before any permanent custody decisions were made. Jake was allowed to go back to Davis's house temporarily while the adults figured out the long-term arrangements. Qley also went back to Davis since there was no question that she was his biological daughter. Davis called me that night after the kids came home and said Jake had run into his arms crying and asking why he had been taken away. Davis said it was the hardest conversation of his life when he had to explain to Jake that he was not his biological father but that he loved him just as much either way. Jake took the news better than expected. He told Davis that he did not care about biology and just wanted to keep living with the only father he had ever known. Jake also said he was curious about Robert but did not want to leave Davis's house. Robert has been very understanding about the whole situation. He said his main goal was to make sure Jake was safe and happy, not to disrupt the boy's life. Robert suggested they start with supervised visits so Jake could get to know him gradually without pressure. Patricia was furious about losing temporary custody of both children. She started calling Davis's house constantly and trying to turn the kids against him by telling them lies about why they had been separated. Davis had to get the phone number changed and install security cameras because Patricia was also driving by the house at all hours. Last week, Patricia's sister called Davis and said Patricia was having some kind of breakdown. Apparently Patricia had been drinking heavily and talking about getting revenge on everyone who had ruined her life. The sister was worried Patricia might do something dangerous. Davis called the police and reported the concerning behavior. The officers went to check on Patricia but she was not at her sister's house anymore. Nobody knows where she went and her phone is disconnected again. Now we are all worried about what Patricia might do next. Davis has the kids in counseling to help them deal with all the upheaval in their lives. Robert is slowly building a relationship with Jake through supervised visits that seem to be going well. As for me, the rumors in our hometown have mostly died down now that the truth came out about Robert being Jake's real father. My family is trying to get back to normal, but the whole experience has been exhausting. I still talk to Davis regularly, but our relationship is different now. There is a lot of hurt and broken trust that will take time to heal if it ever does. I love my brother, but I am not sure we can ever go back to being as close as we were before all this happened. The one good thing to come out of this mess is that Jake and Qley seem to be doing okay despite everything. They are resilient kids who deserve better than the chaos the adults in their lives created. I will update again if anything major happens with Patricia or the legal situation. For now, I am just trying to focus on my own family and move forward from this nightmare. Update 2: I need to update everyone because the situation with Patricia took a dark turn that nobody saw coming. 3 weeks ago, Davis called me at 2 a.m. in a panic. He said someone had broken into his house while he and the kids were sleeping. The intruder had trashed Jake's bedroom, torn up family photos, and spray-painted threatening messages on the walls before leaving through the back door. The police came and took a report, but there was no evidence of who had done it. Davis was pretty sure it was Patricia based on the specific things that were destroyed and the nature of the threats that were written on the walls. The messages were about taking back what belonged to her and punishing people who had stolen her family. Davis installed a security system and started sleeping with a baseball bat next to his bed. He was terrified that Patricia would come back and try to hurt the kids. Jake and Qley were scared to sleep in their own rooms after seeing the damage and the threatening messages. A week after the break-in, Robert got a similar visit at his house. Someone had slashed his car tires, broken his mailbox, and left a note on his windshield warning him to stay away from her son or face consequences. Robert's wife was shaken up because their 2 younger children had been home when it happened. Robert called the police and they connected it to the break-in at Davis's house. The officers said they were treating it as stalking and harassment by the same person. They put extra patrols in both neighborhoods, but Patricia was still nowhere to be found. Then Patricia's sister called Davis with information that made everything worse. She said Patricia had been staying at a motel about an hour away and had been watching Davis's house from a distance. The sister also said Patricia had been posting crazy stuff on social media about getting her children back and making everyone pay for destroying her life. The sister was scared because Patricia had been talking about buying a gun and taking care of the problem herself. She begged Davis to call the police and report Patricia as a danger to herself and others. Davis immediately contacted the authorities and they issued a warrant for Patricia's arrest on charges of breaking and entering, stalking, and making terroristic threats. The police found Patricia at the motel 2 days later. She was arrested without incident, but they also found a notebook in her room with detailed plans about how to get revenge on everyone involved in the custody case. The notebook included my address, Robert's workplace schedule, and information about Amber's school routine. Reading about those plans sent chills down my spine. Patricia had been watching my family and planning to target us even though we had nothing to do with her losing custody of the kids. The police said Patricia's mental state had clearly deteriorated and she was a danger to multiple people. Patricia was held without bail pending a psychological evaluation. The court appointed a psychiatrist to determine if she was competent to stand trial. Meanwhile, Davis got a permanent restraining order protecting him and the kids from any contact with Patricia. During all this chaos, something positive was happening with Jake and his relationship with Robert. The supervised visits had been going well and Jake was starting to open up to his biological father. Robert brought his other 2 children to meet Jake, and they all got along surprisingly well. Jake told Davis that he liked Robert and wanted to spend more time with him, but he was also worried about hurting Davis's feelings. Davis handled it perfectly by telling Jake that he would always be his dad regardless of biology, but that having a relationship with Robert was a good thing that would give Jake more people who loved him. The court worked out a custody arrangement where Jake would continue living with Davis during the school year but spend summers and some holidays with Robert. Both men agreed this was what was best for Jake and they would work together to co-parent effectively. Qley was also doing better after getting counseling to help her understand why her family had fallen apart. She was old enough to understand that her mother had made bad choices but that it did not mean Patricia did not love her. Qley started writing letters to Patricia in jail, but the court said Patricia could not respond due to the restraining order. The psychiatric evaluation results came back and showed that Patricia was indeed having a mental breakdown, but she was competent to stand trial. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she should get treatment instead of prison time, but the prosecutor said the threats and stalking behavior were too serious to ignore. Patricia ended up pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a sentence of 2 years in prison followed by mandatory mental health treatment and 5 years probation. She also had to give up all parental rights to both children as part of the plea deal. Davis was relieved that Patricia would be locked up and could not hurt anyone, but he was also sad that it had come to that. He said Patricia had not always been a bad person and he wished she had gotten help before things spiraled so far out of control. Jake and Qley had mixed reactions to their mother going to prison. They were scared of her after the threats and break-ins, but they also missed the woman who had raised them. The counselor helped them understand that loving someone does not mean accepting their bad behavior. Robert stepped up in a big way during this time. He helped Davis with legal costs and offered to pay for the kids' counseling. Robert also brought his wife and children around more often so Jake could feel like part of an extended family. Around this time, I realized I needed to make a decision about my relationship with Davis. We had been talking regularly, but there was still tension between us about everything that had happened. I was still hurt that he had allowed Patricia to use my identity for years without telling me. Liz and I talked about it and decided that Davis had been a victim of Patricia's manipulation just like the rest of us. Davis had made mistakes by going along with Patricia's lies, but he had also been trying to protect his family in an impossible situation. I called Davis and told him I wanted to work on rebuilding our relationship. We agreed to start having regular family dinners again so Jake and Qley could spend time with their cousins and get back some sense of normal family life. The first dinner was awkward, but Amber was excited to have her uncle and cousins back in her life. Jake and Qley were shy at first, but they warmed up quickly. It felt good to see our families together again after so much drama and separation. Over the next few weeks, Davis and I started talking more like we used to before this whole mess began. He told me more about how Patricia had gradually manipulated him over the years and made him feel like he had to go along with her plans to keep his family together. Davis also admitted that he had known some of what Patricia was doing was wrong, but he was scared of losing Jake if he stood up to her. He said he regretted not being honest with me from the beginning and letting things get so out of control. I told Davis that I understood why he had made the choices he did, but that it would take time for me to fully trust him again. We agreed to take things slowly and focus on being there for the kids who had been through enough trauma already. Robert has been great about including our whole extended family in Jake's life. He brings Jake to our family dinners sometimes and has become friends with Davis, which is probably the best possible outcome for everyone involved. The legal situation is finally winding down. Patricia will be in prison for at least 18 months and then will have to complete a treatment program before she can be released on probation. The restraining order will remain in effect for the full 5 years of her probation. Davis's probation is going well and he should be able to travel freely again in about 6 months. He wants to bring the kids to visit our parents more often once he is allowed to leave his current town. My family has mostly recovered from the stress of this whole ordeal. The rumors in our hometown died down once people learned the real story. Amber is back to her normal routine and Liz is sleeping better now that we know Patricia is locked up. I never thought I would say this, but I am grateful for how everything turned out. Yes, it was a nightmare to go through, but Jake and Qley ended up with more people who love them and a father who was honest with them about their origins. Davis and I are working on our relationship and it might end up stronger than before. The only real loser in this situation is Patricia, who threw away her family and her freedom because she could not stop lying and manipulating people. I hope she gets the help she needs in prison and can become a better person, but that is not my problem to solve anymore. I will probably do one more update after Patricia's sentencing hearing next month, but for now things have settled into a new normal that everyone can live with. Update 3, final. This will be my final update on this situation. Patricia was sentenced 2 weeks ago and I wanted to close out this story properly. Patricia appeared in court for her sentencing hearing and it was the first time any of us had seen her in person since her arrest. She looked terrible. She had lost a lot of weight and her hair was different. The confident, manipulative woman I had known for years was gone and replaced by someone who looked broken and defeated. Patricia's lawyer asked the judge for leniency and said she was getting mental health treatment in jail. Patricia herself gave a short statement apologizing to everyone she had hurt and saying she knew she had made terrible choices. She did not make eye contact with Davis or anyone else during her statement. The judge sentenced Patricia to the full 2 years in prison followed by the mandatory treatment program and probation. The judge said Patricia's actions had traumatized multiple families and put children at risk, which could not be excused by mental health issues alone. Davis told me later that he felt bad seeing Patricia like that, even after everything she had done. He said it was hard to watch someone you once loved destroy their own life so completely. But he also said he was relieved that the legal process was finally over. Jake and Qley did not attend the sentencing hearing. Their counselor thought it would be too traumatic for them to see their mother in court. Davis agreed and arranged for them to spend that day with Robert's family instead. Both kids are doing much better now. Jake has adjusted well to having 2 father figures in his life. He spends weekdays with Davis and weekends with Robert, plus longer visits during school breaks. The arrangement is working well because both men put Jake's needs first and communicate effectively about parenting decisions. Qley has been more affected by her mother's absence than Jake has. She writes letters to Patricia in prison but has not received any responses. Davis explained that Patricia is not allowed to contact them because of the restraining order, but Qley can keep writing if it helps her process her feelings. Robert's integration into our extended family has been surprisingly smooth. His wife and children have become friends with all of us. Amber enjoys having more cousins to hang out with during family gatherings. Robert's wife told Liz that she was glad Jake had such a strong support system to help him through this difficult time. Davis and I have rebuilt our relationship to the point where we talk almost every day again. We still have not addressed all the hurt and broken trust from his years of lying, but we are working on it gradually. Our families spend time together regularly and it feels natural again. The biggest change is that Davis has become more open and honest about everything in his life. He says going through this experience taught him that keeping secrets and going along with lies only makes problems worse in the long run. He has apologized multiple times for not telling me the truth earlier and letting Patricia use my identity. My own family has moved on from the stress and drama of the past year. Liz says she is proud of how I handled everything and supported Davis despite being hurt by his actions. Amber is happy to have her uncle and cousins back in her life regularly. Our parents are relieved that their sons are getting along again and that their grandchildren are safe and happy. They visit Davis more often now that he is allowed to travel freely again since finishing his probation early for good behavior. The only ongoing issue is what will happen when Patricia gets out of prison in about 6 months. She will have to complete a year-long treatment program before being released on probation. Davis's lawyer says the restraining order will prevent Patricia from contacting the children, but there are no guarantees she will follow those rules. Davis is prepared to fight for full custody if Patricia tries to regain any parental rights after her release. The lawyer says Davis has a strong case given Patricia's criminal behavior and the fact that she voluntarily gave up her parental rights as part of her plea deal. Jake and Qley will be older and better able to handle seeing their mother again if that ever happens. Their counselor is helping them prepare for that possibility while also letting them know they have the right to refuse contact if they choose. Robert has said he will support whatever Davis thinks is best for Jake regarding any future contact with Patricia. Robert's main concern is protecting Jake's emotional well-being and maintaining the stability the boy has found living with Davis. Looking back on this whole experience, I learned a lot about family, loyalty, and the damage that lies can cause over time. Patricia's inability to tell the truth about Jake's paternity led to years of deception that hurt everyone involved, especially 2 innocent children. I also learned that people you trust completely can make choices that betray that trust, but that does not necessarily mean the relationship has to end forever. Davis made serious mistakes by going along with Patricia's lies, but he was also trapped in an impossible situation by someone who was manipulating him. The most important lesson is that children deserve honesty about their lives and origins, even when the truth is complicated or painful. Jake and Qley suffered for years because of lies that were supposedly meant to protect them. I am grateful that this nightmare is mostly behind us now. My family is stronger, Davis has learned from his mistakes, and Jake and Qley have multiple adults who love them and want what is best for them. Robert turned out to be a good man who stepped up when he learned he had a son. The legal bills from this whole mess cost everyone thousands of dollars that could have been avoided if Patricia had just been honest from the beginning. Davis had to take out a loan to pay for his defense attorney and the custody proceedings. Robert also spent money on lawyers and DNA testing. I had legal costs to clear my name from the identity theft charges. More importantly, the emotional cost to the children was enormous. Jake spent months confused about who his real father was and why his family was falling apart. Qley lost her mother and had to watch her father go to jail. Both kids needed counseling that will probably continue for years. Our extended family also paid a price. Amber was embarrassed at school and had to deal with rumors about her family. Liz was stressed and worried about our reputation in the community. Our parents were heartbroken watching their sons go through this crisis and seeing their grandchildren traumatized. The ripple effects of Patricia's lies reached into every corner of our lives. Neighbors gossiped, coworkers asked awkward questions, and old friends avoided us because they did not know what to believe about the situation. It took months for the whispers and stares to stop. But we survived it and came out stronger on the other side. Davis proved that he was willing to do the right thing even when it cost him his marriage and put him at risk of losing his children. Robert showed integrity by wanting to be part of Jake's life instead of running away from responsibility. Jake demonstrated remarkable resilience by accepting the truth about his paternity and building relationships with both of his father figures. Qley showed maturity beyond her years and understanding that her mother's bad choices did not reflect on her worth as a person. As for Patricia, I hope prison and treatment help her become a better person, but I doubt we will ever know for sure. The restraining order means she cannot contact any of us, which is probably for the best. Too much damage has been done for any kind of normal relationship to be possible. I am closing this chapter of my life and focusing on the future. My brother and I are working on our relationship every day. Our children are growing up with strong family bonds and honest communication. Robert has become a trusted friend who puts Jake's needs first. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Patricia had just told the truth 11 years ago when Jake was born. Would Davis have stayed with her anyway? Would Robert have wanted to be involved from the beginning? Would Jake have grown up knowing both of his fathers? Those questions do not matter now because we cannot change the past. What matters is that everyone involved learned important lessons about honesty, family, and doing the right thing even when it is difficult. If anyone reading this is dealing with similar family secrets or lies, my advice is to tell the truth as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more people get hurt and the harder it becomes to fix the damage. Children especially deserve to know the truth about their lives, even if adults think they are protecting them by lying. Thank you to everyone who followed this story and offered support. Writing about this experience helped me process everything that happened and get perspective on the situation. I hope our story helps other people who might be dealing with family drama or difficult decisions about telling the truth. This will be my final update unless something major happens with Patricia's release from prison next year. For now, I am focusing on my family and moving forward with my life. The nightmare is over and we can all start healing properly.